Everything we do as an organization, and our organization is made up of the 15,000 plus people that work here, everything that we do has to be about the patient and the care of our patient and the care of our communities. So how do we bring everyone to that mindset that's what we exist for, and everything that we do has to surround that work? If we can't tie everything that we do to that space, then let's re-examine and ask, are we doing the right thing here? And how do we tie the work that we do to things like employee engagement? Does that make sense for us to do it? We need a new logo. Does that make sense? We're working on our culture. Does that make sense? Is that going to enhance patient care? If it doesn't, then we ought to re-examine it. How do we bring us together to take care of our patients and our communities and make that the whole center of our world and what we do? What I want our 1 million plus unique patients that we take care of every year is to have that feeling that is what we are there for in their communities, is to serve them. If we can accomplish that, then we've been successful.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the CEO Podcast. I'm your host, Mario, together with my partner and co-host, Professor Robert Hargrove, where we interview CEOs on what is it like to be the CEO in today's environment. Today on our show, we welcome CEO of University of Vermont Health Network, CEO Sonny Eappen. Sonny, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.
And I would like to emphasize at the beginning that there's something that is a priority that comes before our interest in being a CEO, and that is my motto anyway: better leaders, better world. And I think we want to have better leaders, not just in politics, but in business and in every field and in every institution. So that's the framework that we're looking at this from. And it's interesting that you're a leader in the healthcare world, which is in a position to really make a difference in people's lives, a real difference.
Sonny, if it's okay with you, let's kind of begin from your beginnings. From the research I saw, you grew up with a father who was a pediatrician. And then if you could walk us through like these early years and how did they shape you, right? In the early beginnings.
I don't know how early you want me to start, but I'll start at the beginning. I was actually born and really raised in Chicago. My parents came in the 1960s. My dad came to do a residency in internal medicine, and then he switched to pediatrics. So he practiced for a very long time in Chicago. Shortly after my sister and I were born, we had 4 years where we actually moved to India and lived in India, sort of, for me, somewhere between the 3 and 7, 4 and 8 years of age, and then came back right back to the same place in Chicago. And I grew up really in a Midwestern suburb of Chicago, largely white, middle class environment. My dad worked really hard. He was a very typical immigrant pediatrician. Honestly, I can't remember a single night at home where he didn't get a phone call. He was a solo practice pediatrician where he'd wake up, be totally coherent, and go right back to sleep. Probably once a week, he'd send a patient to the emergency room. And in those days, you'd go see your patient in the emergency room after you sent them there. And so he'd go do that. And as I was growing up, I knew the one thing I didn't want to do was to be a doctor, because he worked way too hard from what I could see. And so, it was really interesting. And I sort of headed in a different path, quite frankly, because I thought he was just away from us a lot. He worked really hard. His days started early, ended late. And so it's interesting how that shaped me in a lot of ways. But growing up in Chicago and in the Midwest was fantastic. I just felt like, growing up in the heartland, I was really the only non-white person in my Catholic high school. So, just totally grew up in a white world outside of my home. And then inside the home, we were like very Indian and stereotypically sort of South Indian. And Jhumpa Lahiri, if you know Jhumpa Lahiri at all, she sort of captures my life in that immigrant experience of growing up, coming in from the outside and growing up in America. But so that's really the beginning. I can tell you a lot more, but let's start there.
That's very interesting. The big question I wanted to ask you, having looked at your resume prior to doing this podcast, you're really extraordinarily accomplished in terms of the number of prestigious university degrees that you have, the prestigious jobs that you've had. I don't have the whole list in front of me. The number of articles that you've written, the number of the speeches that you've given. What I was curious about, it was an old question, what makes Sammy run? What made you so driven to accomplish so much at such an early age? And I'm wondering if you had the equivalent of what the Chinese call the tiger mother that really pushed you.
Yeah. First of all, I think I feel like I'm surrounded by folks in general that are amazingly more accomplished
Really?
than me. I really do. I don't think I'm as driven as most people think of me. I will tell you that I graduated in the lower half of my high school class. I almost failed out at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. And I sort of, feel like I'm still peaking, like I'm still getting there. But so I'm not sort of the classic success story. My wife, on the other hand, was like the valedictorian in her class. She was at the top of her medical school class, undergraduate, ophthalmologist. It was really different. So it's interesting that I think on the outside, you can sort of think things, but I sort of feel like I sort of took a path much later on, and it was a circuitous path of where I am today. And so it's interesting. Thanks for being complimentary, but I don't know if I deserve all that. Math, computer science at the University of Illinois. I did that because I was good at math, not because I loved math, computer science, but it really gave me a foundation for thinking logically. Mario, are you a math, computer science based
Yeah,
person as
I
well?
studied software engineering because I was really good at math. And then at the end, I said, well, I don't want to code 12 hours a day. I want to do something else. So I kind of went to do something else. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very similar. I'll say the same thing because when I was doing computer science, we had to sign up to go work. I'm older than you are, Mario, but you had to sign up for computer time because you didn't have your own computers in the late '80s. I know to me it doesn't feel like it was that long ago, and so you'd have to sign up for computer time. Sometimes it'd be 2 to 4 in the morning, 2 to 4 in the afternoon, and I thought, as I finished, is that what I really want to do? I did it for the same reasons you did. It was relatively easy for me. I learned a lot. It was good, but I realize that that's not the future for me.
So just one more similarity, and I talk about this on podcast. My mom is both a neurologist and a psychiatrist. So she's kind of the old school where you had neuropsychiatrists,
Wow.
right? So I grew up, she was on call. She worked, I think, like 300 hours per month or 320 or 334, like something in that sense. So she was a single mom. So, me and my brother working. So it's kind of very similar path here, at least in the early.
But see, you didn't go into medicine either, right?
No, she told me, whatever you do not go into medicine. I said, all right, Mom.
So I really wasn't intending to flatter you or compliment you. I was just interested. How did you accomplish so much so soon? So what was driving you? Tell us more of the story and what were the inner drivers that were pushing you?
I think there's a cultural aspect of growing up in that first generation immigrant family to drive you to be successful, that it was really important. That was sort of instilled in us growing up. So I think that was part of it. I think by the time I got into medical school, I realized that I needed to learn because if I didn't, I felt like I wouldn't be serving the people, serving my patients well. And so that really drives a certain amount of behavior. You feel this enormous burden that you needed to do that. And I think that kind of propelled me through medical school and residency, that compulsion to got to do the best that you possibly can. And so I think a lot of doctors feel that, and that drives them, I think.
Your humility is impressive. However, what was it that caused you to go from mathematics to medicine? I think that's one of Mario's questions.
Yeah, I think it was as I was finishing up my undergraduate degree, and it was a liberal arts education. So I did have the things I needed for prerequisites for medical school. And I realized that this isn't the path that I could find happiness or joy long term. The idea that either I would be working in a financial market or in computer science. And as I saw what those jobs looked like, I applied, I interviewed, I actually had secured a couple of jobs. And I thought, that's not going to bring me joy. And I, probably backed into maybe I should apply for medical school. Like that was a path I understood and I realized what that would mean. And maybe I matured a little bit more from the days when I was in high school. I could see the value that my dad, and the joy that he got from what he was doing. And we talked quite a bit about that at the time. So I think all of that contributed. And I was fortunate enough to get into the University of Chicago, which was phenomenal and fantastic for me, really the most academic place I think I've ever been, where the sake of learning is in and of itself just valued so much. I loved it. It's great education for me and sort of set me up
So
for
were
the
you
future.
driven by having a purpose-driven life, or is that an overstatement?
I think there was a purpose driven component and a
All
practical
right.
component. So, right. I mean, if you say my purpose was to find joy and some value in my life and that's purpose driven, yes, that's what I was looking for.
And the practical component?
The practical part was the a measure of success, and it was a
Oh,
path, predefined in my culture, like a doctor and engineer. That was an easy path. Okay, if you're going to do one of those things, secondarily maybe you could be a lawyer, but doctor, engineer, lawyer, like that was a path to success culturally, and so that was sort of ingrained in my mind. But I'll tell you that I may have headed in that way, but I've never regretted that decision. It's an amazing, amazing opportunity and career, right? To be able to take care of people when they're vulnerable, when they're sick. It's like this incredible privilege that most people don't appreciate. So it's been a great choice for me.
great way of putting it.
Yeah. For me, what is phenomenal, especially in the medical profession, and full disclosure, I do come from Europe, so our medical and healthcare system is a little bit different than here in US. So I've read you oversaw operating rooms, you became a chief medical officer. But for me, that's a phenomenal balance between having a leadership role and actually leading people, but also doing, let's call it what it is. It's a very, as a CMO, with actually practicing medicine.
Yeah. So the reality is that when I started taking on those roles, my clinical life decreased. Didn't go to zero. It didn't go to zero till I got to Vermont. But so it went from 5 days a week working clinically to 3 days of work working clinically to 1 day a week. And so when I was at the Mass Eye and Ear, I was working 1 to 2 days a week clinically, the other 3 to 4 days being administrative, right? And so I think the reality is that you have to make that transition when you move into that world. And then it even goes down further. I went to 1 day a week and then to 1 day every other week is the pattern I maintained until I left the Brigham and Women's Hospital.
Yeah.
I'm curious why you use the word administrative role as opposed to a leadership role. The word MBA is Master of Business Administration. It's probably an archaic word at this point. We need people in business and healthcare who are leaders. So I'm just curious that you use the word administrative. Is your job to administrate something or to create a new future for healthcare and for humankind?
Well, it's interesting that I went to Yale for a business school, and their motto is educating leaders for business and society. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the idea of being a leader and leading folks or working with folks to get us to a different place is really what drives that change. And whether it's an administrator, I think all of our administrators are leaders, but I think all physicians are leaders. I think if you're in an operating room as a surgeon or an anesthesiologist, you're a leader. You have that responsibility in that space. The difference between an administrator and a clinician for me was the opportunity to impact or influence more people at the same time. So as an anesthesiologist or an OB anesthesiologist, maybe you're taking care of a patient at a time or 5 or 10 patients at a time, whereas you can start influencing hundreds, if not thousands of people and tens of thousands of patients in the way that they care for people. And so I think that transition is awesome, right? It's overwhelming in some ways, but it's amazing and awesome to be able to do that. So that's a different kind of an opportunity to be able to serve and take care of people. Does that answer your question, Robert? I'm not sure if I hit it or not. So the idea of administration versus leadership.
I'm a professional provocateur, I think. But I just think that someone who's in charge of a major hospital system, if he's only being an administrator, he's not really doing his job. My definition of leadership is someone who's at the front, someone who creates a new future versus just administrates and optimizes the present. So I guess my next question would be, well, my next thing would be to tell you never use that word again.
All right, you've convinced me. I hear you.
So a lot of people have leadership potential, but they don't have leadership opportunity. You have a leadership opportunity being in charge of a major hospital system. So where are you leading that organization to? Is one question. Another one would be, you said you had the opportunity to influence thousands of people. What is your message to the people you're trying to influence, the doctors and nurses and managers of the system? Where is here and where is there?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's sort of like my whole world right there, and it's going to be hard to encapsulate. But I think the where for our group, for our organization of where I'm trying to influence is the idea that everything that we do as an organization, and our organization is made up of the 15,000 plus people that work here, everything that we do has to be about the patient and the care of our patient and the care of our communities, right? So how do we bring everyone to that mindset that that's what we exist for, and everything that we do has to surround that work, so that even if we can't tie everything that we do to that space, then let's re-examine and actually ask, are we doing the right thing here? And how do we tie the work that we do to things like employee engagement? Does that make sense for us to do it? We need a new logo. Does that make sense? How do we tie that? We're working on our culture. Does that make sense? Is that going to enhance patient care? If it doesn't, then we ought to re-examine it. So my work on the inside is, how do we do that? How do we bring us together to take care of our patients and our communities and make that the whole center of our world and what we do, right?
Mm.
And so that's on the inside. On the outside, what I want are million plus patients, million plus unique patients that we take care of every year, is to have that feeling that that is what we are there for in their communities, is to serve them. If we can accomplish that, then we've been successful. And then, there's a lot of things that go behind that, right? What was their patient experience like? What's our quality like? What's our safety like? Those are all components of it. But at the essence of it, do they feel like we exist to serve them? And have we done that? Do they feel like we have taken care of them? If we've accomplished that, then we've accomplished our
I think
mission.
there's a big distinction between being able to provide top quality medical care from, let's say, a technical point of view, premier medical care, and a premier medical experience for the patient. That's probably a very different mindset than what's out there today. I,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe you're right, and there is a distinction there, right? So you could technically do that operation perfectly
Right.
and say, boy, my quality is great, but the patient's experience of that and what they got out of it didn't work out, right? So I think to serve what the patient's experience is and what they need, part of that is quality and part of that is safety, but part of that is looking at what does the patient actually need and want, and are we delivering on that, right? That's the experience.
Sonny,
Yeah, go ahead, Maria.
can you
Maria.
please say this to the German doctors?
Well,
Phenomenal quality, zero experience. Yeah, just do this and call me.
well, that's another example of the premier quality, poor experience. I'm thinking of when I was a kid. I'm older than both of you. So when I got sick as a kid, the doctor would actually come to the house, knock on the door, and carry a little black bag. That was a very personalized experience, especially as I was hiding under the bed and didn't want to see the doctor. Today, it seems like healthcare has become totally depersonalized. Let's say I'm a 60-year-old guy living in Rutland, Vermont, and I don't have a computer. Maybe I don't even have a cell phone. And I try to sign up. I try to go to a doctor appointment, and they tell me what's my user ID and my password. And I don't even know what that is. Or if I do, I don't know how to negotiate the system. That to me would be the first blockage for people to have a premier medical experience. Just being able to get an appointment, and also one that doesn't take 3 months to get. What do you say to that? These passwords and user IDs, I think, are really a barrier for a lot of people getting healthcare. They just give up before they even get started.
Yeah.
Sonny, this is not at all inspired by real life examples that Robert has.
Yes, I'm probably the example of it.
Yeah, so I think you're right. It is a big challenge for us, all those things that you mentioned. And then if you add racial barriers, ethnic barriers on top of what you say, right? So all of those things there are many, many barriers to getting really great care. And part of the challenge for us is, how do we meet the patient where they
Ah,
are to serve them, right? But I think you're right. I mean, so we have the other extreme where people don't, if you look at my kids, their goal is, how do I never show up in your office, but I want to get the care? Can't I do it over my phone? Like, how do we deliver? So you've got to go, you're right. Right now, we're not walking in two canoes. We've got to deliver that whole spectrum of care of how we do that, how we juggle that, right? And people's expectations are that you will do all of that. And that is a really big challenge, particularly for not-for-profit organizations that are trying to serve the entire community. Yeah.
So, do you have a piece of paper with your message written down on it that you're trying to get through to how many people is it that work for you? With you?
15,000.
You have a source document that says, this is the message I'm trying to get through to my team.
So we do have something like that. We do have our what we call our sort of objectives and key results for the year.
That sounds very bureaucratic. Objective. You think that the patient cares about that? What is the message you're trying to get through to connect people's hearts and hopes?
Robert, you just said to me, do I have something for our 15,000 employees? And I said, that's what we have.
I'd prefer that you had a term like, what's your teachable point of view that you're trying to get out there to people?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I was going to say that on that piece of paper, and it really literally is an 8.5 by 11 kind of piece of paper. On that piece of paper, we also have what are we trying to do and what do we believe our organization's vision and mission is. We're working on that right now because it was formulated probably about a decade ago, and we're a very different organization today. And so we're working on that to hear our people's voices about what it is that we are all about. As I talked about, everything we do is to serve our patient and serve our community. What does that mean? And how can we put that in words that mean something to the people that are actually delivering that care, all of our employees? So we're working on that right now. It does live on our piece of paper right now, but that is an active process, and we're going to have an answer for you.
Yeah, it might have it on a piece of paper. Does it live in people's minds and hearts? Something about you makes me want to provoke you more and more. I don't.
Yes. So I would say right now, I think it's just a funny little point that you're hitting, but I don't think right now it does live in people's hearts and minds. And that's the work we're doing to make sure that we are actually capturing their hearts and minds so that it can live in there and grow in there and breathe. And you're absolutely right. It's really, really important. And that's why we're doing the work.
Mario, sorry, I've taken over a bit. I got excited talking to him. Keep going. And you ask some questions.
For me, I'm always curious whenever we interview CEOs. I'm always very, very curious about what Robert and I know is your biggest strength and biggest ally, and that is your executive team, right? So can you tell us a little bit about it? Who are the people? How have they grown over the years into their roles? And most important, because what Robert and I are seeing is every CEO has phenomenal people on the executive team, like A or A plus players. One of the biggest, I would say, hurdles is sometimes those executive teams don't work as a team. They work as very gifted individuals, right? So to tell us a little bit about your executive team, and then what advice would you give to the CEO, especially someone coming in, like a newly minted CEO, how to address this issue? Because these are the top 5 or 6 people that you are every day with.
No, totally agree. I think that group of people that I have around me are amazing and they're outstanding. And you're right, there are probably a lot of amazing, outstanding people. And the question is, how do we get to work together? And I'm just a huge believer that my job as the CEO is to create an environment where everyone feels safe. And by safe, I mean being able to bring their whole selves into work. Like that's welcomed. Like we want you to bring your unique, diverse perspectives and your background and your experience. And how do you feel safe disagreeing with people, putting your sort of uncertain thoughts on the table so that we can make the best collective decision for our organization? So how do we create that environment where people really can challenge each other, right? That's the work. And to bring everyone on board that this is the way we're going to operate. And so you've got these individuals who are phenomenal, great experience and knowledge, technical knowledge and skills. And then how do you get them to work together and go outside of their lanes as a leadership team? Don't just stay in your lane, but you're coming in with 25 years of CFO experience in a healthcare institution. You know more than a CFO. You know more than accounting and reporting. You know about a hospital, and it's okay for you to do that. I use a baseball analogy you can use any sport you like, but it's the idea that if you're a shortstop and you see your pitcher, you know, kicking his leg out to the left instead of the right when he pitches, should you say, hey, he's the pitcher, I'm the shortstop? Or do you say, I've been playing baseball for 25 years, and when I see that, I know what that means, and I'm going to go talk to the pitcher about that, or I'm going to talk to my team about that, right? That's the skill I think that you bring or you want to bring as a CEO, that people feel safe and comfortable making that suggestion, getting out of their lane, getting out of their comfort zone to be able to do that. Because that's how you get the organization to move forward.
And it's also, I think you said the word safe space, right? If we allow people, especially these gifted executives, to disagree, to voice their concerns, and then after all of that, we all agree, oh, this is the true north, as Robert says, this is what it says on our source document, this is where we all go, then we all go, right?
And Mario, I was just going to add one thing to your comment there, which is that we might not even all agree. And that's even okay.
Completely okay.
It's that we've all been heard.
Yeah. Completely okay to disagree. I mean, there is no growth if we live in an echo chamber, if we just agree with everyone, right? Whenever I ran teams, I always try to have at least one person that will intentionally disagree with me. Me being a former executive in the revenue space, that wasn't too difficult. Salespeople are very vocal. They will disagree constantly. But I always cherish those types of people because they, am I doing this correctly? Did I make this? Is this the right path? Did I look at it from all the angles in service of what was our biggest goal or big goal that we were actually trying to achieve?
I was thinking something about trust, that when you're in a CEO job, it's kind of like being the quarterback of a football team. You have to trust that you can pass someone the ball and they will catch it instead of drop it. Talk about that a little bit. I'm sure you can't have 100% trust in every person. So what are your thoughts as a CEO? How do you manage?
I think it's a really good point. And as the CEO, you can't do everything and you don't have the knowledge in every area. So you really do have to trust that your team members have that expertise. So I'm totally with you. And and we start even in our conversations with the idea that the default is that we trust each other, that we have good intentions and we have good intent. You have to show me that you don't. And we have to have a conversation that I'm not just telling myself a story, but that really is malintent. So yes, so trust is key. I think it goes right into the safety that we talked about and having those conversations.
For me, there is a phenomenal book. I don't know if you read. I read a lot. But the book, it's called Speed of Trust. And it's written by son of late Professor Covey. And for me, that was an eye-opener. Everything moves faster when there is a high degree of trust.
I haven't read the book, but you're absolutely right. I wrote it down.
My last question is, looking ahead, I know you mentioned digital health and virtual care as part of your, let's say, the grand vision. So how do these new innovations that are coming our way, even with the rise of large language models and virtual reality and all of that coming to the UVM long-term strategy, obviously in the service of improving both quality and experience?
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head again, I think, on that. So whenever I think about innovation and how we're going to move it into our organization, there are some goals associated with that, right? Can we deliver better care? Can we do it at a lower cost? Can we be sustainable? So when we bring in something to try, whether it's digital or other innovations to do it, large language models, whatever it would be, can we deliver on all of those? And so it's either we can deliver more care at the same quality and cost, great, that's wonderful. We can make life better for our caregivers without increasing cost and maybe getting some greater efficiency, great. We're trying really hard to move away from, yes, this is better, but it costs twice as much, so I can do less. We have limited resources, and we have to figure out, for us, how do we take care of our entire population with our limited resources? And how do we do that equitably across our entire region. And so we can't bring in things that are just one dimensional in that space, meaning that, yes, this does things quicker, it does it twice as quick, but it costs 4 times as much. Or quality goes up by 20%, but it costs 50% more. That doesn't work in our model, and actually doesn't work for our country if we care about how do we deliver equitable care to everybody. And so we've got to really change the model of how we think about innovation, digital and otherwise. And so we're trying to live that here. It's challenging, right? Standards of care change, costs change in other way, workforce challenges, and yet our reimbursement model isn't going to change to an extent to match that. So we've got to be more innovative and creative. And so in that space, to come back to your question around virtual care, is that better for our patients? Can we do more less expensively by using technology? And where we can find those opportunities, we're trying to take advantage of it. So that's where I see it in our network, in our space. It's very deliberate.
Well, we want to thank you for being a good sport, asking you all these provocative questions. But I have one more. I would like to challenge you for a moment to think of yourself as the Elon Musk of healthcare. One of the things that made Elon Musk successful was that he's very bold. He did not do the reasonable thing, he did the unreasonable thing. There's a great quote from George Bernard Shaw that all history depends on the unreasonable man with a vision. So, and now I'm going to insert something. Today is election day in the United States. It's a historic day. Each of us has a limited number of presidential election days in our lives. This is a very important one. And I'm thinking back not really to today, but the inauguration of Franklin Roosevelt in 1936. And he talked about what he called the 4 freedoms: freedom from want, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, and freedom from fear. And I want to challenge you to think, or for us to think, would there be such a thing as freedom from disease? Where would we like the American healthcare system to be 10 years from now? Is there a freedom from disease or freedom from the 4 morbidities or whatever they are? Is that an attainable goal? Should we be aiming for something greater, bigger, and better than more or improvement? I know it's a very big question, but take a shot at it.
That is a really big question to end on. I wish I had some short, pithy answer to give you, but I don't think it's freedom from disease. I don't think we can aspirationally or realistically shoot for that in 10 years. But I think we can shoot for freedom from want. And that would be amazing. And I think it's achievable if we really chose
That's
to
what
do
I think
it.
I was trying
To
to
me,
get
that
at.
means, okay, it means to me that when you need care, you get the care that you
Yes.
need. And at the point of contact of that care, your ability to pay or who you are or what language you speak or what disability or ability you have is irrelevant. And that is something that we can all strive for and achieve. And that's a little bit different than some of the other desires that we have, to eliminate cancer.
Yeah, I didn't phrase that well. I think freedom from want with respect to healthcare that's a great answer. That's a beautiful vision. May your vision be realized.
I hope in our lifetimes.
Everyone, thank you so much for sticking so far. Sonny, this conversation was truly phenomenal. I hope me and Robert were as good at this conversation as you were our guest. I do hope we didn't disappoint. And to every listener, join us again next time.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Robert. Really enjoyed it.